My name is Daniel, and this happened to me in the fall of 2016. I had been living in North Carolina most of my life, and the Appalachian Mountains were practically my backyard. I loved hiking alone, just me, the trail, and the endless silence of the woods. People always warned me about bears, coyotes, even desperate drifters hiding out in the mountains, but that never scared me. What scared me were the old folk stories the locals whispered about when they thought outsiders weren't listening. They said there were hollows in those mountains that didn't belong to us, that belonged to something else entirely. Places where the forest grew too quiet, where birds wouldn't sing, and where even the wind refused to move. That fall, I set out on a 3-day solo hike through a stretch of forest near the Tennessee border. It was dense, overgrown, and barely marked on maps. I wanted to see untouched wilderness, but by the second evening, I realized I'd made a mistake. The trail had all but vanished, and the silence pressed in on me like a weight. No crickets, no rustling, no birds, just me and the feeling that the woods were holding their breath. I tried to calm myself. Silence didn't mean danger, I told myself. It just meant I was far from civilization. Still, something about that quiet gnawed at me. I made camp that night near a ridge, gathering what little firewood I could find. The firelight flickered against the trees, throwing tall, twisted shadows across the ground. I ate some jerky, drank water, and wrapped myself in my sleeping bag. That's when I heard it for the first time. A low, dragging whisper, like wind pushing through dry leaves. But there was no wind. At first, I thought it was my imagination, until I heard it again. Words, muffled, broken, but words nonetheless. They came from deeper in the woods, faint but deliberate, as though someone was speaking in a language I couldn't quite grasp. I froze, straining to listen, but the whispers stopped the moment I moved. My fire crackled weakly, the flames barely giving me comfort. I wanted to call out, to tell whoever it was that I wasn't a threat. But something inside me told me not to. Whoever or whatever was out there didn't want to be found. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every crackle of the fire, every shift of the branches above felt amplified in the silence. At some point, exhaustion must have taken over, because I woke to the embers of my fire nearly dead, and the woods cloaked in an even thicker darkness. That's when I saw the figure. Not standing, no, crouching, just beyond the ring of a light. It was pale, almost glowing, and its limbs seemed too long, bent in strange ways. I thought it was a deer at first, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was facing me, watching. The whispers came again, stronger this time, weaving through the trees around me. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure it could hear it. I wanted to grab my flashlight, but my body refused to move. I just sat there, frozen, staring at this pale thing crouched in the dark. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The whispers faded into the trees, leaving me shaking and drenched in cold sweat. At dawn, I told myself it had been a dream, a trick of exhaustion. I packed quickly, eager to put distance between me and that clearing. But as I walked, the forest didn't feel right. The trees seemed denser, closer, as if the woods themselves were pushing me off the trail. Worse still, I realized I had no idea where I was going. My compass spun aimlessly, the needle twitching as though it couldn't find north. The whispers returned mid-morning. Not faint this time, closer, clearer. They slithered through the trees like snakes, brushing against my ears even when I spun in circles trying to pinpoint them. Sometimes they sounded like my name. Other times, like distant voices calling from faraway hollows. By noon, I found something that nearly made me turn back. Carvings in a tree. Deep gouges forming symbols I didn't recognize. They weren't random. They looked intentional, like warnings. The bark beneath them was blackened, as though burned. But there was no ash, no fire damage. Just the symbols, glowing faintly in the sunlight. I pressed on, though my instincts screamed to leave. By late afternoon, the trail was gone entirely, swallowed by undergrowth. I tried retracing my steps, but the forest didn't look the same anymore. Every tree looked identical. Every path led me back to the same place. And then I stumbled into the hollow. A depression in the earth, circular and smooth, surrounded by trees that grew at odd, twisting angles. The air was heavy there, thicker somehow, harder to breathe. I knew immediately that this was one of the places the old folks warned about. In the center of the hollow stood a stone, tall, jagged, and black, unlike any rock I'd seen in these mountains. Around its base were more carvings, crude and angry, gouged deep into the stone itself. The whispers surged when I stepped closer, their voices overlapping until it felt like a crowd pressing in around me. My skin prickled, and the hair on my arms rose. I don't know why I touched the stone. Curiosity, maybe. Or maybe something deeper, something pulling me toward it. The moment my fingers brushed the surface, the whispers stopped. The silence was worse, heavier. I pulled my hand back, but when I looked down, black residue stained my skin like soot. It burned, searing into my flesh until I scrubbed it desperately against my jeans. That night, I didn't dare make a fire. I huddled against a tree, clutching my knife, and waited. The whispers came again, but this time they weren't outside. They were inside my head. Clearer now, stronger. They spoke in broken English, repeating phrases over and over. You shouldn't be here. Leave. Leave. I wanted to run. But no matter which direction I tried, the hollow was always there, waiting. The forest had turned against me, and I wasn't alone. I could hear them moving in the trees, circling, watching, waiting for me to falter. The next morning, I woke to find footprints around me. Human-like, but wrong. Longer, with elongated toes that dug deep into the soil. They circled where I slept, closing in as if something had stood over me while I slept. My knife lay beside me, untouched, but my backpack was open. Nothing stolen, nothing missing, just opened, as if someone or something had gone through it. I stumbled through the woods, desperate to escape, but everywhere I went, I found more of those carvings. On rocks, on trees, even etched faintly into the soil itself. The whispers had grown constant, like a chorus behind me. And then I heard laughter. High, shrill, childlike. It echoed through the trees, rising and falling, sometimes behind me, sometimes ahead. I screamed for it to stop, my voice breaking the silence. For the first time, the forest answered. Something screamed back. Not human, not animal. But something caught between the two. By the second night in the hollow, I was broken. I hadn't eaten, barely drank water, and my legs were shredded from running through the underbrush. I collapsed near a fallen log and tried to steady my breathing. That's when I noticed something carved into the log. Words, in English this time. Faint, shaky, but readable. Don't listen, don't look, don't follow. My heart dropped. Someone had been here before me, and if they'd written this, then they must have known what I was facing. The whispers grew angry after I read the words, louder, harsher. My head pounded as if my skull was splitting. The forest around me came alive. Branches snapped though no wind blew. Figures darted between trees, pale and thin, their movements jerky and unnatural. They crept closer each time I blinked, vanishing when I turned my flashlight on them. I knew then I wouldn't survive another night here. I don't remember making the decision to run, but suddenly I was sprinting, crashing through the woods like a wild animal. My flashlight bounced wildly, shadows whipping across the trees. The whispers screamed in my ears now, furious, like 1,000 voices clawing at my mind. I fell more than once, my knees bloody, my palms shredded, but I kept moving. At some point, I stumbled onto a trail, a real one. I don't know if it was luck or something finally letting me go, but I followed it with everything I had. And then, through the trees, I saw headlights. A dirt road, civilization. I burst from the woods, gasping and crying as a pickup truck screeched to a stop a few feet from me. The driver jumped out, cursing, asking if I was okay. I couldn't answer. I just kept whispering, "Don't listen. Don't follow." He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I never went back to those mountains. Not once. Even now, years later, I still dream about the hollow, the black stone, the whispers. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and swear I can hear them again, slithering through the walls of my house, telling me to come back. I did some research after I returned. Locals near the Tennessee border mentioned stories of the hollow ones, spirits, demons, entities. No one agreed, but they all said the same thing. Once you've been in their hollow, you're never free. They follow you, waiting for the day you slip, the day you weaken enough for them to claim you. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and I'm alone, I swear I see a pale figure crouched just beyond the window, waiting, watching, whispering. My name is Sarah, and this story begins in the spring of 2018. I had just graduated college and decided to take a solo hiking trip through the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia. I'd always loved being alone in the woods, surrounded by towering oaks and maples, the air heavy with the scent of wet soil and pine. My friends thought I was reckless, but I'd been hiking these mountains since I was a teenager. I knew the trails, or so I thought. By the second day, I found myself wandering off the main trail, chasing a particularly thick fog that rolled down the ridges like a river of smoke. It was breathtaking and wrong. The trees were tighter here, their branches weaving into a dense lattice overhead, blocking most of the sunlight. Birds were silent, squirrels vanished, and even the wind seemed hesitant to stir. I stumbled upon a cabin. It wasn't on my map, wasn't marked anywhere I'd seen. At first glance, it looked abandoned, falling apart. Windows shattered, the roof sagging, boards rotting. But something about it was alive. The air around it felt thick, almost viscous, and I swear I heard faint creaking sounds from inside, like the floorboards were shifting under invisible feet. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I approached, drawn in by curiosity. The door was ajar. A chill rolled out, wrapping around me, smelling of rot and smoke, and yet something human lingered beneath the decay. Something watching. I stepped inside, my boots creaking against warped wooden planks. The smell hit me first. Damp, rotting wood, mixed with something metallic, almost like blood. I shined my flashlight around the main room. Furniture lay in pieces, a table overturned, chairs broken, shelves empty except for dust and shards of glass. But the most unsettling part wasn't the disrepair. It was the writing. Scrawled across the walls in a mixture of dirt, soot, and something red that might have once been paint were words that made my stomach twist. Leave before they wake. Do not look behind the stove. They never forgive. I froze. The warnings were crude, but intentional. Each letter jagged as though carved by someone desperate. My pulse hammered in my ears, yet I couldn't bring myself to leave. My curiosity was a magnet, pulling me deeper. I moved toward the back of the cabin, flashlight illuminating shadows that seemed to twitch and pulse along with my heartbeat. Then I saw it. The stove, old and blackened, but the door was slightly ajar. A faint light flickered from inside. A warmth, almost human, radiated outward, and I heard it. Soft whispers, calling my name, almost coaxing me forward. I wanted to turn and run, but my legs moved of their own accord, drawing me closer to the stove. My hand trembled as I reached for the stove. The whispers grew louder, almost insistent. I bent closer, peering into the dark hollow of its open door. For a moment, all I saw was shadow, but then movement. Something shifted inside, coiling and twisting as though it had no true form, no legs, no arms, only a vague humanoid outline. I jerked back. My flashlight fell from my grip, spinning across the floor. The figure in the stove seemed to react, stretching upward like smoke, forming a body. I tried to scream, but the air was thick, clinging to my throat. My eyes darted around the room. Shadows danced in patterns that didn't belong to anything in the cabin. I could feel them watching me, circling, waiting. Then I heard footsteps, not mine. Heavy, deliberate, dragging across the floorboards. They weren't outside. They weren't behind the walls. They were inside. I wasn't alone. And the whispers weren't coming from the stove anymore. They were coming from the corners, the ceiling, the shadows themselves. My instincts finally kicked in. I ran for the door, tripping over broken chairs, smashing into the frame. As I burst outside, the cabin seemed different. The windows, shattered yesterday, were intact. The roof, sagging before, now looked pristine. The fog curled closer, swallowing the structure. I couldn't tell if I'd imagined it, or if the cabin had never been abandoned at all. I didn't stop running until I reached a familiar trail, my lungs burning, boots slipping in the mud. My hands were scratched, my clothes torn, and I could still hear the whispers, faint, trailing, as if following me. I told myself I'd imagine it all. It had to be a hallucination caused by exhaustion, isolation, and the thick fog. By late afternoon, I found a small creek and sat down to catch my breath. But the forest around me didn't feel safe. Every tree seemed unnaturally close, their trunks twisted in ways that weren't possible. Shadows clung to the ground as though alive, moving in opposition to the fading sun. And then I saw the first footprints. Not mine. They were too long, too narrow, with elongated toes pressing deep into the soil. They circled around me, appearing and disappearing like they were breathing in the earth itself. A cold realization gripped me. I hadn't been alone in that cabin, and whatever followed me had left the hollow. My flashlight, thankfully still in my pack, flickered when I turned it on. For a brief moment, I thought I saw movement between the trees. Pale, thin figures darting behind the trunks, vanishing when I tried to focus. Panic surged. I didn't stop running until I saw signs of a road, the edges of civilization cutting through the oppressive wilderness. I finally emerged near an old ranger station just as the sun dipped below the ridges. I pounded on the door, breathless and frantic, and an elderly ranger opened it. He looked me over carefully, eyes narrowing. When I tried to explain the cabin, the whispers, the shadows, he cut me off. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. "The cabin. The hollow. It doesn't let anyone leave untouched." I froze. How could he know? He beckoned me inside and explained that deep in these woods were areas locals called the Forgotten. Places where people vanished without trace, where the woods themselves seemed alive, guarding secrets from intruders. The ranger warned me not to speak of it, not to return. Those who disobeyed rarely made it back. That night, I slept in a cabin at the ranger station. But even there, in relative safety, I could hear the faintest whispers when the wind shifted. The forest had left a mark on me, a lingering presence that refused to fade. I felt eyes on me even indoors, and I knew the hollow was still watching, waiting for a moment of weakness. Sleep didn't come. Every creak of the old cabin, every gust of wind sounded like whispers, like the hollow calling. At 2 a.m., I heard tapping on the window. I froze. My heart pounded. Slowly, I turned toward the sound and saw a pale figure crouched just beyond the glass, its elongated limbs barely fit beneath the window frame, its face obscured by shadow. I blinked, and it vanished. I told myself it was my imagination, exhaustion playing tricks, but the fear clung to my skin like ice. I couldn't ignore it. Over the next hour, shadows flickered in corners, lights seemed to shift on their own, and every sound from the forest became amplified, distorted, like the woods were breathing. By morning, I convinced myself to leave. I packed my things carefully, keeping my eyes peeled. But as I walked back toward the trailhead, I realized the forest had shifted again. The trail markers I had memorized were gone, replaced by twisted, unnatural paths. My compass spun wildly, unable to find true north. The forgotten woods didn't want me out. I tried to keep my pace steady, following instinct rather than the trail. Hours passed, the fog thickened, and the forest seemed endless. I began to hallucinate. Or at least, I thought I did. I saw figures standing between trees, always at the edge of my vision, vanishing when I looked directly. I heard whispers repeating my name in slow, deliberate cadence. Then I found it. Another cabin, smaller, older, more decrepit than the first. But this one radiated something more hostile. The door hung open, swaying slightly despite the still air. The shadows inside seemed to twist and reach for me. My skin crawled. Yet I couldn't stop staring. The urge to see, to understand, was overpowering. Stepping back, I noticed footprints leading inside. Human, but not. They were narrow, elongated, circling the entrance. The air itself felt thick, resisting my movements. It was as if the cabin exhaled, breathing the forest's sinister energy outward, calling me closer. I turned away, running blindly through the fog. My heart felt like it would burst. Every time I slowed, whispers returned. They called from the shadows, from the cracks in trees, from the swirling mist at my feet. I stumbled into a clearing where the fog thinned, and I saw them. Dozens of pale figures, crouched, watching, blending seamlessly with the forest. I froze. They didn't move toward me. At first, just watched. But their presence was unbearable. My chest tightened, and the air grew colder, heavier, like ice forming inside my lungs. One figure shifted, elongated limbs stretching toward me. I screamed and bolted. My boots sank into mud, roots grabbed at me, but I didn't stop. By sheer luck, I tripped out onto a logging road. The fog retreated slightly, the trees receding. I didn't look back, though I could still feel hundreds of unseen eyes on me. The hollow, the cabin, the figures. They were all out there, waiting, patient and eternal. I finally reached the main trail at dawn, sun breaking weakly through mist. My legs were shredded, hands bleeding, and every muscle screamed. The trail was real, marked, familiar, but the forest behind me seemed different, quieter, heavier, watching. I flagged down a passing hiker. I wanted to tell them everything, to warn them, but the words wouldn't come. The ranger's warnings echoed in my mind. The forgotten woods never forget. Once you're marked, you're never truly free. The hiker smiled politely and moved on, oblivious. Even months later, I can't shake it. At night, I dream of the cabin, the whispers and the figures crouched between trees. Sometimes, I swear I see faint shadows at the edge of the road near my home, twisting like smoke, watching, waiting for me to forget. I never returned to the Appalachian Mountains. I don't hike alone anymore. Sometimes, when I'm driving past thick forest or see fog rolling over ridges, I feel that cold grip around my chest. The hollow's mark. It waits, patient, eternal. And I know that if I ever venture back, if I ever follow the fog or stray from the trail, it will be there, watching, waiting for me. The forgotten woods don't forgive. They don't forget. And sometimes, just sometimes, the whispers find me in my dreams, calling my name, reminding me that I was never truly free. My name is Thomas, and this happened in the winter of 2017, deep in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky. I had been a wildlife photographer for years, drawn to the mountain's solitude and the way the forest seemed to breathe. That winter, I decided to venture further than ever before, chasing shots of rare owls and elk in the snow-laden forests. The first day was peaceful, almost serene. Snowflakes drifted silently through the bare branches, covering the ground in thick white blankets. The mountains seemed endless, untouched, perfect for my camera. But as I climbed higher, a storm rolled in. The wind sliced through my jacket, and visibility dropped to a few meters. My GPS flickered and died, leaving me with only a compass and instinct to navigate. As I pressed onward, I noticed a faint plume of smoke curling above the ridges. Curious, I altered my route and found a small log cabin, isolated, surrounded by jagged trees. Smoke rose from a crooked chimney, yet no footprints marked the snow. I hesitated. Something about it screamed danger, yet also familiarity, as if the forest had been expecting me. I approached slowly, heart thudding, my camera ready. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. A man, older, unshaven, eyes wild, stood there. He didn't speak, only stared. And then, in a voice rough as gravel, he whispered, "You shouldn't be here." They watched. The man, who later introduced himself as Elias, motioned for me to enter. Inside, the cabin was cluttered with animal pelts, broken furniture, and jars filled with strange substances. The fireplace burned weakly, casting flickering shadows that danced along the walls. Every corner seemed alive, shifting subtly when I blinked. Elias didn't offer a reason for my presence or how he knew I would come. Instead, he muttered warnings about things that lurk in the woods, tales of disappearances, and shadows that moved against the wind. I tried to keep the conversation casual, mentioning my photography, but he seemed uninterested in humans' ordinary concerns. Then he spoke of the nights. Long, black nights, where the mountains weren't empty, where the forest itself became predator. "They come," he whispered, eyes darting to the corners of the room. "Not men, not animals. Something older. Something that knows the mountains better than you ever will." His warning sent chills down my spine. I felt an oppressive weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Even my camera felt heavy in my hands, as though it could sense the forest's malevolent attention. And outside, the snowstorm intensified, the wind howling like a chorus of voices calling my name. That night, I slept on the floor, wrapped in my sleeping bag. But sleep was impossible. Every crack of wood, every groan of the old cabin sounded like a voice whispering secrets. Outside, the storm raged, and the trees bent unnaturally, creaking in ways that made my blood run cold. Around midnight, I awoke to movement near the doorway. Elias was gone. In the dim light of the fireplace, I saw shadows shifting unnaturally, moving against the contours of the cabin. And then I heard it. Soft, deliberate scratching on the roof, like claws dragging across shingles. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding my veins. I unzipped my sleeping bag and reached for my camera, thinking some animal had found its way inside. But the shadows weren't animal. They were humanoid, stretching, bending in impossible angles, crouching along the walls. My fingers trembled as I realized I was not alone. Suddenly, a whisper, clear and deliberate, echoed through the room. "Thomas." My name. From the shadows. I froze, unable to move. The figures seemed to watch, patient, waiting. And then one stepped forward, too tall, too thin, face indistinct in the darkness. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I didn't sleep again that night. Every shadow seemed to pulse with intent, stretching unnaturally, whispering my name in voices I couldn't place. Elias had warned me, but now I understood. The forest didn't forgive intruders. It didn't forget them either. It marked them. By morning, the storm had subsided, leaving the mountains eerily silent. I stepped outside to clear my head and was immediately hit by a strange sensation. The snow beneath my boots wasn't as soft as it should be. It had been compacted, molded, like something or someone had moved across it in ways that defied logic. I followed the trail back toward the cabin's edge, but the landscape seemed to shift with every step. Hills appeared closer, then farther. Trees rearranged themselves as though the forest itself was alive, warping the world around me. Elias appeared behind me without a sound. "They watch," he said simply. "Not just the forest. You. Always you," I shivered. His words were vague but terrifyingly accurate. He handed me a small carving, rough, jagged, made of blackened wood. "Keep this. They fear it." For now, I didn't argue. I clutched it tightly, feeling its weight grounding me. But as we parted ways, he disappearing back into the forest, the shadows seemed to follow. Even hours later, I felt their gaze pressing against my back. That cabin, those mountains, they weren't just haunted. They were alive. I decided to descend the mountain, seeking the nearest town. But the path was deceptive. Hills sloped in ways that contradicted physics. Trees leaned toward me, branches reaching like skeletal fingers. Every step I took was matched by a soundless echo. Footsteps behind me that weren't mine, rustling in perfect cadence. I stumbled upon an abandoned homestead. Broken tools, overgrown gardens, windows boarded up. For a moment, I thought I might find help, but no one was there. Only the oppressive silence, broken occasionally by the wind carrying faint whispers. My instinct screamed to leave immediately, but curiosity, a foolish, fatal curiosity, kept me lingering. Then I saw it. A figure crouched near the barn, pale, elongated, features blurred by frost and shadow. It turned slowly, head tilting unnaturally, as though examining me. I froze, camera ready but useless against my terror. The figure didn't move toward me. It just watched, a predator patient, eternal, waiting for me to make a mistake. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I realized something horrifying. The figure wasn't alone. Hundreds of faint silhouettes moved between the trees, barely visible in the fading light. The forest had eyes everywhere, and I was standing in their hunting ground. Night fell faster than I expected. I built a small fire, hoping the light would keep the figures at bay. But the shadows on the periphery grew longer, stretching toward me, shifting against the natural flicker of the flames. I could hear whispers again, faint at first, then louder, calling my name in a chorus that was impossibly close and impossibly far away at the same time. Sleep was impossible. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves sounded like deliberate stalking. The shadows danced along the edges of the clearing, bending reality around them. My camera, lying next to me, seemed to vibrate subtly, like sensing the presence of entities beyond human perception. At one point, I caught movement at the tree line. Figures stepping in unison, almost ceremonial, circling the fire without disturbing the snow. I realized then that they weren't just watching. They were herding me, corralling me into a place I couldn't yet see. I didn't move, didn't breathe too loudly. One misstep could draw attention, and attention here was dangerous. The night dragged on, each second a lifetime, until dawn broke. But the sense of being watched never left. The forest had claimed part of me, leaving a mark invisible to the eye but permanent in my soul. Dawn was no relief. Mist clung to the ground, curling around trees like fingers. The fire had died overnight, leaving only ash and embers. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. Every instinct screamed to flee. But which way? The forest had shifted yet again. Trails I had memorized were gone, replaced by twisted paths, snow-covered and unrecognizable. As I stumbled blindly, I spotted a figure up ahead. Elias, or someone resembling him, stood silently, watching. He raised a hand and mouthed words I couldn't hear. My legs moved automatically toward him, but when I got closer, he was gone. Instead, there were footprints, narrow, long, like those I had seen before, leading deeper into the mountains. I realized then that the forest didn't just watch. It guided, tempted, herded. Every choice, every step was manipulated, and I was still very much inside its game. Panic gripped me, but I forced my feet to move, following instincts more than sight. Every snapping twig, every whisper reminded me that I was never alone. By late afternoon, exhaustion had set in. My muscles ached, snow seeped through my boots, and the cold gnawed at my bones. But worse than the physical pain was the weight pressing on my mind, the forest's presence. Every tree, every shadow, every whisper reminded me I was being watched, stalked, tested. I stumbled upon a ravine, the cliff steep and jagged. A fallen tree formed a narrow bridge over icy waters. My heart pounded as I crossed, aware of the shadows clinging to the edges of my vision. And then I saw them, dozens of pale, elongated figures crouching on the rocks below, motionless but exuding a palpable malice. They didn't move, didn't breathe, yet the air vibrated with their intent. One figure lifted its head and stared directly at me. Its face was featureless, yet I could feel its gaze burning into my soul. froze, every instinct screaming to run. But I knew that if I moved too fast, it would follow. Slowly, I reached into my jacket pocket and held the black carving Elias had given me. It seemed to vibrate faintly, almost alive. The figures hesitated. A ripple passed through the group, as if my presence and the carving had disrupted some ancient rhythm. The forest seemed to exhale, and I realized I might survive the night if I kept moving and kept the charm close. Night fell faster than expected. I found a small rock overhang and huddled beneath it, trying to stay warm. The wind carried whispers, growing louder with each passing hour. They called my name, soft at first, then urgent, like predators closing in. I dared a glance outside. Figures moved between the trees, stretching impossibly tall, bending unnaturally. Some crouched, some hovered just above the ground. I could feel their eyes on me, hundreds of them, a suffocating weight pressing down. Every instinct screamed to flee. But the forest had shifted again. Familiar paths disappeared, replaced by twisted, impossible trails. Sleep was impossible. I clutched the carving tighter. It pulsed faintly in my hand, warmth spreading like a heartbeat. I whispered to myself, repeating Elias's words. They fear it. For now. That tiny fragment of safety allowed me to endure the long, endless night. When the first pale light of dawn touched the mountaintops, I forced myself to move. The forest seemed to resist every step. Trees bent subtly toward me, branches clawing at my coat. Whispers trailed me relentlessly. But with the carving as my guide, I navigated through the unnatural landscape, each breath shallow, each heartbeat loud enough to echo through the trees. By mid-morning, I stumbled onto a logging road, the first sign of civilization I'd seen in days. Relief should have washed over me, but it didn't. The forest still pressed against the edges of my vision. Shadows lingered in the trees, twisting unnaturally even in the daylight. I flagged down a trucker, my hands shaking, breath ragged. I tried to explain, to warn him, but he didn't see anything. He just nodded politely, eyes glazed. My words felt hollow, inadequate. Some things, I realized, can't be understood by those who haven't experienced them. Weeks later, back home, I could still feel the forest's gaze. At night, shadows moved just beyond the windows. Whispers sometimes return, faint but unmistakable, calling my name. The Appalachian Mountains hold secrets older than memory itself, and the forest never forgets. The black carving remains with me, my fragile barrier against whatever watches, waits, and hungers in those dark, ancient woods. I will never return. And even now, every time I see fog curl over ridges, I feel its icy grip around my chest, reminding me that the mountain hermit's warning was real. The forest doesn't forgive. My name is Rebecca, and this happened the winter I turned 24. I had grown up near the Appalachian Mountains, but had always avoided the dense, remote forests my parents warned me about. One December, desperate for adventure and armed with my camera gear, I decided to explore an area locals called Whispering Hollow. The name alone made my skin crawl, but I told myself it was just a local superstition. The first day was deceptively calm. Snow blanketed the ground, and the trees arched high above, skeletal and silent. I followed a narrow trail, taking photos of frost-covered branches and the occasional deer. The silence was heavy, unnatural. Every crunch of snow underfoot echoed far too loudly, like the forest was listening. By late afternoon, I stumbled across a small clearing. At its center stood a dilapidated cabin, hidden by twisted pines. Smoke rose lazily from its chimney, though there were no signs of recent footsteps. My curiosity overwhelmed caution. I approached slowly, camera raised, capturing each shadow as I moved. Inside, the cabin was coated with years of dust and decay. But the strangest thing wasn't the dirt or the broken furniture. It was the whispers. Soft, unintelligible at first. They grew clearer the longer I stayed. Leave. 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 They echoed around me, though no one was there. My heart pounded. The hollow, I realized, was alive. I forced myself to calm down and explored the cabin further. Every surface was coated with a layer of frost, though the fireplace seemed recently used. On a small wooden table lay old journals, yellowed and brittle. As I flipped through the pages, a story emerged. A family had lived here decades ago, but something in the woods had driven them mad. Each entry ended with frantic scribbles. They watch, always. The whispers intensified, now circling me. I could feel them brushing against my mind, invasive, demanding. My camera's lens fogged despite the cold, and when I looked through it, the shadows in the corners of the room appeared to stretch, twist, and move independently. I decided to leave, but when I turned to the door, it slammed shut with a deafening crack. The cabin groaned as though alive. Panic surged. I pounded on the door, shouted, and finally, after what felt like hours, it creaked open just enough for me to squeeze out. But the forest beyond was different. The path I had followed earlier had vanished. Trees leaned toward me, branches clawing like skeletal hands. The forest swallowed me instantly. Every direction looked identical. Twisted trunks, dense fog, frozen undergrowth. Panic clawed at my chest. Whispers echoed from all sides, sometimes sounding like my own voice calling back at me, distorted and mocking. I stumbled blindly, hoping to find a road, a trail, anything familiar. Then I saw them. Faint silhouettes crouched among the trees, barely visible, yet their presence was undeniable. They didn't move like normal animals or people. They bent and twisted, moving fluidly in ways that defied human anatomy. I froze, heart hammering. One stepped closer, head tilting unnaturally, and I could feel its gaze pierce my mind. I ran. My boots sank into icy snow. Branches tore at my coat and hair. The whispers followed, growing louder, chanting my name. Every step I took seemed to loop me back to the clearing with the cabin, though I had run in a straight line for what felt like hours. I realized the forest was alive, sentient, and it had marked me. By the time the first moonlight broke through the fog, I found a small stream. Its water was dark and still, reflecting pale shapes behind me. I could feel them, crouched, waiting. And I knew that no matter how fast I ran, Whispering Hollow wouldn't let me leave unscarred. I stumbled into a thicket, desperate for cover. The trees closed in like a cage, branches scratching my face and arms. Every direction seemed identical. Twisted trunks, patches of fog, and the snow-covered ground glinting faintly under moonlight. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent, and now they seemed to come from inside my own head. You cannot leave. You cannot leave. I tripped over a fallen log and landed in a hollow. Looking up, I saw shadows shifting above me, bending unnaturally. They moved like liquid, slithering across the snow and branches. My breath fogged in the icy air, and the cold no longer felt physical. It was as if the forest itself was seeping into me, trying to claim me. I tried to call for help, but my voice caught in my throat. Then I remembered Elias from the previous story, the hermit who had warned about the forest's sentience. I didn't know him. But somehow, I understood. Whispering Hollow was no ordinary forest. It was older than any memory, a predator patient and intelligent, feeding on fear, marking those foolish enough to enter. Suddenly, movement in the fog. Figures crouched, emerging slowly, circling me. I could see their elongated limbs, the way they bent unnaturally, almost impossibly. I clutched my camera like a talisman, its lens reflecting the pale shapes as I backed away, knowing that one wrong move could mean I would vanish like the families in the journals. Hours, or was it minutes, passed, though I had no way of measuring time. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly. My legs burned from running, my lungs ached from cold, and yet the shadows persisted. They weren't following me in a normal sense. They were everywhere, in everything. The trees, the snow, the wind. They were alive, extensions of a single malevolent consciousness. I stumbled upon a shallow cave partially hidden by boulders and brush. I crawled inside, hoping for sanctuary. Inside, it was warmer, eerily quiet. My heartbeat slowed slightly, and I dared to look outside. The silhouettes paused at the cave's entrance, almost as if testing me, their blank, featureless faces tilting, observing. I realized then the horrifying truth. Whispering Hollow didn't just consume bodies, it consumed minds. The whispers weren't merely warnings, they were invitations, slowly eroding my will. I tried to focus on something tangible, anything that anchored me to reality. My camera became that anchor, and I snapped a few pictures, hoping the mechanical click would break the spell. But the forest ignored it. The figures retreated only slightly before melting back into the fog. I knew they were waiting for me to make a mistake, to lose focus, to give them an opening. Sleep was impossible. Every nerve screamed that the forest would claim me if I faltered. Dawn was a false promise. When light finally broke through the fog, it revealed only more forest, twisted, endless, suffocating. The trees seemed closer, denser, their branches clawing at the sky. I could see the shadows more clearly now, crouched in unnatural poses, watching, patient. I pressed on, following a faint trail that appeared to lead toward a ridge. Each step felt like a battle. The snow resisted my feet, shifting under me. Every whisper from the forest tested my resolve. Turn back. Stay forever. I ignored them, focusing only on moving forward. Eventually, I came across a small creek. Its water was black, reflecting the shapes behind me. I could see elongated limbs pressing against the surface, faint but unmistakable. Panic surged. My camera trembled in my hands as I realized these beings were not confined to the forest. They were part of it, manifestations of its will. I remembered the journals, how the families had been driven mad. I could feel their fear echoing through the hollow. I needed to survive, to escape before my mind broke completely. But as I pressed on, I realized there might be no escape. Whispering Hollow wanted me, and it was patient. By midday, exhaustion threatened to overtake me, but I forced myself onward. The forest seemed to warp around me. Hills became valleys, trees leaned in impossible angles, and snow-covered trails twisted back on themselves. Every direction felt like a trap, and the whispers had grown insistent, circling my mind like predatory birds. Then I heard something new. A faint rustling, not the wind or the snow. I froze, straining to see through the thick fog. From the mist emerged a figure, hunched and pale, moving with fluid, unnatural grace. Its head tilted at impossible angles, and though its face was featureless, I felt its gaze pierce me. It did not speak, did not chase, it simply watched. I tried to back away, but the ground seemed to shift beneath me. My legs felt heavier, like gravity had changed. The figure stepped closer, and suddenly the whispers coalesced into a single voice in my mind. You belong here. Forever. Panic surged through me. I sprinted blindly, branches slashing my face, snow blinding me. In the distance, I glimpsed a faint light through the trees. Hope flared. I ran toward it, not daring to look back, though the whispers now laughed, a cold, hollow sound echoing in my skull. I realized then that the hollow was not just a place, it was alive, aware, and it was hunting me with patient intent. The light led me to an abandoned ranger station, perched on a ridge. I stumbled inside, breathless and bleeding from scrapes. The station was frozen in time, maps tacked to the wall, logs from decades ago. But what caught my eye were symbols etched into the floorboards and walls, spirals, eyes, and elongated figures reminiscent of the ones haunting the forest. I felt the hollow's presence grow stronger. Shadows flickered along the walls, almost sentient, and the whispers rose to a deafening crescendo. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching my camera like a talisman. Every instinct screamed that moving even slightly could draw the attention of whatever controlled the hollow. Suddenly, I heard scratching at the windows. The elongated figures were here just beyond the glass, pressing against it with impossible flexibility. Their faceless heads tilted, eyes, or the absence of them, boring into me. The whispers became intelligible. We are patient. You will stay. Forever I realized that leaving this ridge would not save me. The hollow had claimed me already. It had been shaping the forest, warping reality, guiding me toward this inevitable confrontation. My mind threatened to snap under the weight of fear, but I knew I had to survive. Somehow, night fell with terrifying speed. The whispers became voices in my head, arguing, pleading, commanding. The forest outside seemed to pulse, alive with malice. I barricaded myself inside the ranger station, but the figures moved freely outside, weaving through the trees with fluid, impossible motions. I could feel their presence pressing against my consciousness. Every shadow, every corner of the room seemed to contain them. I turned on my camera's flash, hoping the light would repel them. The figures recoiled slightly, their twisted forms almost flickering like shadows on water. But they returned almost immediately. The hollow was infinite. It could not be escaped by light or flight. I scribbled a desperate note in the ranger log, hoping someone might find it. The hollow is alive. It watches, waits, and shapes the forest. Do not enter. It will take you. My hand shook violently as I wrote. The whispers grew louder, almost screaming now. And I knew that soon they would find a way inside, into the station, into my mind. I curled into a corner, clutching my camera, wishing desperately that dawn would come, that the forest would release me. But deep down, I knew the hollow never released anyone willingly. When dawn finally broke, it offered no relief. The fog lifted slightly, revealing the forest in its full, twisted glory. The station was empty, and the figures had vanished. But the forest had changed. Every tree leaned toward me, branches like claws reaching into the sky. The paths I had memorized were gone, replaced by unfamiliar, snow-covered trails. I walked slowly, camera in hand, knowing I would have to retrace my steps carefully. The hollow's whispers were faint now, but persistent, like a reminder that it was patient. I reached the main trail eventually, exhausted and traumatized. But I could feel the forest's eyes on me even as I descended toward civilization. Weeks later, I still wake in the middle of the night, feeling branches brush my skin and hearing whispers curling around my mind. I will never enter Whispering Hollow again. Some places are alive, sentient, and malicious. The forest claimed its mark on me, and though I survived physically, I know I am never truly free. My name is Michael, and this story begins the winter I decided to escape the chaos of city life for a remote cabin deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Black Pine Ridge was a name locals whispered with unease, and the sparse online reviews only added to the tension. The cabin was isolated, accessible only by a snow-covered logging road that twisted through dense forest. I convinced myself that solitude would be peaceful, unaware that the forest itself was waiting, patient, and malevolent. The first night was calm, too calm. The wind howled, but only outside, as if the trees were whispering secrets to one another. I explored the cabin, noticing its rustic charm and antiquated design. But something felt off. The shadows didn't align with the corners, and the air seemed heavier than it should. My camera picked up faint flickers of movement in the frames I reviewed, though nothing appeared in reality. Around midnight, I heard scratching at the door. At first, I dismissed it, maybe branches, wildlife. But then came the whispers. They weren't in the wind. They were inside my mind, faint but unmistakable. "You're not welcome. Leave, or stay forever." My heartbeat accelerated. I approached the window, seeing only dark, motionless trees. Yet I knew they were out there, watching. I clutched my flashlight and ventured outside. The snow was pristine, untouched, except for footprints that weren't mine. They circled the cabin, vanishing before reaching the tree line. My instincts screamed to leave, but curiosity rooted me in place. And I realized that something about this ridge wasn't natural. It was alive. I retreated into the cabin, shutting the door and bolting it. But the scratching continued, now on the roof, then the walls. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a pressure in my chest, like the forest was pressing down on me. My camera, sitting on the counter, flickered to life on its own, capturing a pale, elongated figure standing just beyond the porch, head tilted unnaturally. I grabbed a hatchet and edged toward the door, trembling. The figure didn't move closer. It simply observed, impossibly still. I could feel its gaze, cold and intelligent, penetrating my mind. Every instinct screamed to run, but the snow-laden roads had disappeared under the fog, and trees that now twisted unnaturally around the cabin. Black Pine Ridge had become a labyrinth designed to trap me. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time felt suspended. The whispers transformed into voices, arguing, laughing, echoing inside my skull. My only solace was the fireplace, its faint warmth reminding me I was alive. Yet, even there, the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, moving independently of light or shape. I realized then the truth. The cabin was not abandoned. Something had been here for decades, shaping the forest, observing, waiting. And now, I was the newest participant in its sinister game. Caught between reality and nightmare, morning came, but it brought no relief. The fog hung thick, turning the trees into twisted, looming shapes. I forced myself to step outside, hoping daylight would make sense of the horrors. The snow crunched under my boots, yet the footprints I had seen the night before had multiplied, forming patterns that made no logical sense. Some were human, others impossibly long and distorted, bending and twisting as if the forest itself had walked. I followed the path cautiously, the hatchet in my hand. Every rustle in the pines made my heart jump. Every shadow seemed to lean toward me. And then I saw them. Figures crouched, elongated, blending seamlessly with the trees. They didn't run. They didn't call. They simply observed, patient, their faceless heads tilting as though inspecting me. I stumbled across an old hunting blind atop a hill and climbed inside, trying to get a vantage point. Through the binoculars, I could see dozens of these pale figures spread across the ridge, not moving like humans, but flowing through the forest like water. My stomach churned. Black Pine Ridge wasn't just haunted, it was alive, a predator, shaping the forest to trap its prey. By evening, I realized the forest was guiding me, testing me, tormenting me. Every step felt scripted, every breath monitored. I understood then. This place didn't want to kill me immediately. It wanted to break me mentally first, to bend my mind until I belonged to the ridge, like those who had vanished before. By nightfall, the whispers had returned. They were louder now, shaping themselves into intelligible words. Stay, belong, forever. I bolted the cabin doors, but I could hear scratching along the walls and roof, like fingernails clawing through wood. My camera, left on the counter, blinked on by itself, capturing frames filled with impossible shapes. Figures that bent inhumanly, their limbs stretching into shadows that shouldn't exist. Desperation took over. I grabbed supplies and attempted to hike down the ridge, hoping to reach the logging road. But the forest shifted around me. Trees bent subtly, obscuring paths, creating loops that made the same areas appear over and over. Every time I tried to run, I ended up back at the cabin. I realized the ridge itself was alive, feeding on my fear, reshaping the environment like a living maze. At one point, I tripped over a mound in the snow. Looking closer, I realized it was human-shaped, frozen in time. Pale, elongated limbs twisted unnaturally. I stumbled back in horror. The hollow, the ridge, the forest. It didn't just want me scared, it wanted me to see, to understand, to feel the hopelessness that had claimed countless others before me. I retreated to the cabin, shaking, tears freezing on my face. The whispers followed me inside, and I clutched my hatchet and camera, waiting for what was coming. I tried to distract myself, checking the cabin for anything that might help, old journals, maps, or clues left by previous visitors. I found nothing concrete, just signs that others had been here, left in terror. Notes scribbled in frantic handwriting warned, "Do not stay. Do not wander. It sees everything." Around midnight, I saw movement outside. Through the frosted window, a figure emerged, bending in ways no human could. Its faceless head tilted toward me, and I felt its presence invade my mind. The whispers were no longer outside. They were inside, echoing through my skull, repeating my name, mocking my fear. I realized I had to survive until dawn. I lit a fire, hoping the light would give me some semblance of protection. The fire flickered violently, shadows stretching across the room in impossible shapes. Every creak, every whisper made me flinch. Heart racing, lungs burning. My mind teetered on the edge of madness. Hours passed. The figures circled outside, patient, watching. I realized this ridge was not just a location, it was an entity, a predator, a sentient force shaping reality to torment anyone who dared enter. I didn't know how I would survive the night, but I knew the ridge had chosen me, and it would not let go easily. By the early hours of morning, exhaustion clawed at me, but fear kept me awake. Every sound was amplified. The groan of the cabin settling, the crackle of the fire, even the whispers now speaking clearly. You cannot leave. You belong here. I hugged the hatchet, praying for the night to end. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the window. Its head tilted impossibly, limbs bending like shadows in the wind. My camera blinked on automatically, capturing frames of the figure as it floated, defying gravity, circling the cabin like a predator. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. Panic gripped me so tightly, I thought I might collapse. I gathered courage and stepped outside, hoping to confront or escape the entity. The forest had transformed. Trees twisted unnaturally, branches forming shapes that resembled reaching hands. The snow beneath my feet seemed to pulse, and the footprints I followed led nowhere, always circling back. I realized Black Pine Ridge was not just haunted, it was alive, bending reality, shaping the world to keep me trapped. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but the figures moved in perfect synchronization, shadows gliding along the snow, cutting off every path. The whispers turned into mocking laughter, echoing in my mind, and I knew that leaving the ridge alive would require cunning, courage, and luck, something I wasn't sure I had. I decided to follow a faint ridge trail, hoping it would lead to civilization. Every step felt like wading through treacle. The snow seemed to resist me. The whispers multiplied, some echoing my own thoughts, others mocking, "You cannot leave. You are ours." My pulse raced, and I felt my mind stretching to the brink of madness. Then, a shadow detached itself from the forest. It moved fluidly, bending, twisting, almost like liquid darkness taking humanoid form. Its faceless head tilted toward me, observing. I raised my hatchet instinctively, though I knew it would do little against an entity that defied physics. I ran, zigzagging through the trees, hoping to confuse it. The forest twisted again. What should have been a clear path now led me into a dense thicket, branches scratching at my face. The figure followed relentlessly, gliding through snow and shadows with supernatural speed. Every instinct screamed survival, but my body screamed exhaustion. I realized Black Pine Ridge didn't just trap bodies, it broke minds. It wanted to spare before it claimed its prey. By dawn, I stumbled across a fallen log and collapsed, gasping, trembling. The shadows retreated slightly, observing from the mist. I understood that the ridge had tested me, and only because I survived the night would it allow me a temporary reprieve. By mid-morning, I had regained some strength and attempted a cautious escape. The snow-laden ridge was deceptive. Every step forward seemed to take me backward. Footprints appeared and vanished inexplicably, and the shadows of the elongated figures loomed even in daylight. I found a frozen creek and followed it, hoping water might lead to a road or village. The whispers softened, but were still there, persistent, a constant reminder of the ridge's power. You are ours, forever. Trees arched unnaturally over the creek, their branches twisting like fingers, closing in on me. Every rational thought screamed that this was not a normal forest, that logic did not apply here. I glimpsed something horrifying. Figures crouched along the creek, perfectly still, watching. Their limbs bent at impossible angles, heads tilting unnaturally. My breath caught. I realized they weren't confined to the ridge. They were part of it. Extensions of its consciousness, agents of the forest's will. I pressed on, desperate, slipping and sliding over icy rocks. My hatchet felt heavy in my hands, more a symbol of hope than a weapon. The ridge tested me relentlessly, and I knew that my survival depended on endurance, cunning, and luck. Black Pine Ridge had claimed many, and I had to ensure I wouldn't join them. By late afternoon, exhaustion and fear were almost unbearable. The ridge warped reality around me. Hills became valleys, shadows shifted independently of the sun, and every tree seemed to lean toward me, branches like claws. I realized I had been walking in circles. The forest was alive, aware, and fully engaged in my torment. I stumbled upon an abandoned ranger cabin, half buried in snow. I entered, hoping for shelter, only to find symbols etched into the walls and floors, spirals, eyes, and elongated humanoid figures reminiscent of those outside. The whispers rose into a crescendo, almost screaming. I clutched my hatchet, feeling the forest's eyes pressing into my skull. Through the frosted windows, the figures gathered. They didn't move naturally. They bent and twisted like shadows given life, their faceless heads tilting as though studying me. I understood then that escape would not be straightforward. Black Pine Ridge was patient, intelligent, and malevolent. It did not merely haunt, it consumed. I barricaded myself and waited for nightfall, knowing the forest would test me again. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow could be the end. I would survive, but only by staying vigilant and resisting the despair the ridge sought to impose. Dawn finally broke, revealing the ridge in all its warped glory. The forest seemed calm, but still alive. Trees leaned toward me, branches twitching as though sensing movement. Footprints that had haunted me vanished under fresh snow. The figures that had stalked me were gone, or perhaps merely hidden, waiting. I stumbled onto the logging road I had originally entered from. My body ached, my mind reeled. But I forced myself forward. The ridge had released me, but the whispers remained in my head. Faint, a reminder that I had been marked. I realized Black Pine Ridge didn't kill its prey immediately. It left them haunted, aware that the forest's power lingered forever. Weeks later, I cannot sleep without feeling branches brush my skin or hearing faint whispers in the night. I know the ridge watches, waits, and remembers. Some places in the Appalachians are alive, sentient, and malicious. I survived physically, but the forest marked my mind. I am never truly free. My name is Sarah, and this happened during my winter hiking trip in the remote Appalachian Mountains. I had always loved solitude, the crunch of snow under boots, and the quiet majesty of the mountains blanketed in frost. But Devil's Backbone was different. The locals spoke of it with hushed tones, warning travelers about disappearing hikers and strange lights in the forest. I dismissed their tales as superstition until that first night. The trail was narrow, carved into a ridge with cliffs dropping into shadowed valleys. The wind bit through my jacket as I pitched camp near a cluster of ancient pines. I set up my tent, thinking the night would be peaceful. But as darkness fell, I noticed the forest was unnaturally quiet. No wind rustled the pines, no animals called. It was as if the entire mountainside held its breath. Then I heard it. A faint, high-pitched whispering that seemed to come from all directions. I spun around, but the snow-covered trees were motionless. The whispers grew louder, threading themselves into my thoughts, repeating my name. Sarah, stay, forever. My heart pounded. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the surrounding forest, seeing only shadows. Yet I felt a presence moving, watching, patient. I realized then that Devil's Backbone was not just a trail. It was alive, aware, and hungry. Every instinct screamed to leave, but the ridge seemed endless, folding back on itself. I knew survival depended on staying calm, but fear had already started to crack my resolve. As night deepened, the whispers became clearer, forming words I could almost understand. You cannot leave. Join us. Stay forever. I wrapped myself tighter in my sleeping bag, but the sound seemed to echo inside my skull. My camera, left on the ground, blinked on, showing faint, elongated shapes gliding between the trees. They were human-like, but stretched and twisted in ways that defied nature, moving silently with a predator's patience. Unable to sleep, I stepped outside to stretch, the cold biting through gloves and coat. The ridge seemed to shift subtly, the trail disappearing into a wall of snow-laden trees. My breath fogged in the freezing air, heart hammering. Then I saw movement. A pale figure at the edge of the tree line, head tilted unnaturally. It didn't walk. It floated, gliding toward me as the whispers grew louder, shaping my fear, twisting my thoughts. I ran back to the tent, tripping over roots and frozen rocks. The forest seemed to mock me, folding and bending, erasing the path I had carefully mapped. I realized Devil's Backbone didn't just conceal, it trapped, shaping reality itself. My survival depended on endurance, clarity, and a touch of luck I wasn't sure I had. The night dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity. I sat inside the tent, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline, while the forest whispered outside. The snow glowed faintly under moonlight, yet I could see shadows bending and twisting in unnatural ways. The figures were closer now, moving silently between the trees. I could feel their gaze pressing into my mind, probing, mocking. Driven by a mixture of fear and defiance, I unzipped the tent and tried to move along the ridge, hoping to find a way down. Every step felt heavy, as if the snow resisted me. Footprints that I thought I left vanished, replaced by long, unnatural shapes. Panic surged as I realized the ridge had trapped me in a loop, bending reality to ensure I remained on its frozen trail. I stumbled into a clearing where the trees arched over like cathedral ceilings. There, I saw them in full. The elongated figures crouched, head tilting in impossible angles, observing me. The air seemed to thrum with their presence, the whispers now screams inside my mind. Join us. Stay. Forever. I fell to my knees, shivering, and realized this was no ordinary haunting. Devil's Backbone was sentient, feeding on fear, testing me, shaping the trail to break my mind. I backed into a thicket, hoping the dense trees would shield me. My breath came in ragged gasps, and the forest seemed to pulse around me, alive, aware, waiting. I understood then that escape wouldn't be easy, and survival was uncertain. Hours passed, or what felt like hours. I wandered cautiously, hugging the ridge walls, listening for any sign of movement. Every snap of a branch, every crunch of snow under my boots sounded amplified, and every shadow felt alive. The whispers evolved, now forming words. You are ours. You cannot leave. My skin crawled, and my heart hammered in my chest. Suddenly, I saw a figure directly ahead. Its body was pale, elongated, limbs bending unnaturally, and its faceless head tilted, examining me. I froze. My instincts screamed to run, but my legs refused. The entity floated forward, gliding with impossible grace. I noticed its shadow moved independently, stretching and writhing across the snow. Panic overwhelmed me, and I bolted blindly down the ridge. The forest reacted instantly, twisting around me. Snow-laden trees bent, forming walls, obscuring the path I thought I knew. Footprints behind me multiplied and vanished, as if the trail itself mocked my efforts. I stumbled over rocks and roots, gasping for air, my flashlight flickering. The whispers and shadows were relentless. Devil's Backbone was alive, watching, shaping, testing. I realized then that leaving required more than speed. It demanded understanding. The ridge wasn't just a place, it was a predator. Survival meant outsmarting the forest itself, a terrifying thought that left my mind teetering on the brink of madness. By late night, fatigue pressed against me like a heavy blanket. But the forest allowed no rest. Every snap of a branch, every whisper of the wind felt deliberate, as if the ridge itself monitored my every move. The snow beneath my boots seemed to shift subtly, hiding paths, revealing dead ends, twisting reality around me. I realized the trail wasn't just frozen. It was alive, shaping my journey, guiding me toward unknown horrors. I stumbled into a narrow valley, the trees arching overhead into grotesque shapes. Shadows moved independently, bending and writhing along the snow. My camera flickered on, capturing elongated figures circling in the mist, their faceless heads tilted unnaturally, observing my every trembling step. Panic surged, but I forced myself forward, desperate to find a way off the ridge. Then I saw the footprints, dozens of them, human and unnatural, intersecting, diverging, vanishing into the fog. It was a maze, and I was the prey. The whispers became voices, some familiar, some alien, echoing in my mind. Join us. You are ours now. My breathing grew ragged, teeth chattering, as I realized survival depended on understanding the forest's rules. Clutching my flashlight and hatchet, I pressed on. Every sense screamed danger, but I knew stopping meant being claimed. The ridge was patient, intelligent, and cruel. It would not release me easily. As dawn approached, exhaustion made my limbs heavy. But the forest's terror intensified. Figures appeared ahead, moving fluidly, limbs bending impossibly. The ridge seemed to stretch and fold, creating loops that forced me backward, trapping me. Whispers merged into a chorus. You cannot leave. Belong to us. My mind screamed, body shaking uncontrollably. I forced myself to climb a rocky outcrop for vantage. From above, the ridge sprawled endlessly, twisted trees casting unnatural shadows. Figures glided along snow-covered paths, observing, waiting. Some crouched silently, others floated like specters. I realized the forest was a sentient predator, testing me, feeding on fear, shaping reality to ensure compliance. A sudden gust scattered snow across the ridge, revealing a narrow path that might lead to escape. I sprinted, dodging branches clawing at my face, limbs trembling. The shadows followed, not rushing but observing, patient. Every instinct screamed to continue, yet every step felt heavier, as if the ridge itself resisted my flight. I stumbled into a hollow, gasping. The figures gathered at the ridge edges, tilting their faceless heads, a silent reminder that Devil's Backbone watched, calculated, and would not forget. My survival depended on vigilance, cunning, and endurance. By mid-morning, I had gained temporary clarity, but no safety. The forest's walls of twisted pines enclosed me, each step uncertain. Footprints appeared and vanished in the snow, guiding and misleading in equal measure. Whispers continued, layered and mocking. We see you. You are ours. Forever. I clutched my hatchet, trembling, eyes darting across the ridge. Suddenly, a frozen clearing revealed dozens of humanoid figures crouched and floating. Limbs bent at impossible angles, heads tilted unnaturally. Their eyes, or faceless voids, seemed to pierce my soul. I realized the ridge wasn't haunted. It was alive, conscious, a predator shaping reality to torment intruders. I forced myself onward, crawling over snow and ice, slipping repeatedly. The ridge's test was mental and physical. The forest wanted despair before submission. Every breath felt stolen, every movement resisted. I could sense the figures flowing like water, shaping themselves to the terrain, observing my weakness, calculating the moment to strike. I climbed a fallen tree to gain perspective, glimpsing the ridge's vastness. The figures paused, as if acknowledging my effort, then resumed their silent, sinister surveillance. I realized that survival required more than speed. It demanded understanding the predator's rules. By afternoon, exhaustion threatened my consciousness. I stumbled onto a frozen creek, hoping it would lead to a road. Snow and ice hid every path. The figures glided along the banks, head tilting unnaturally, observing. Whispers now included my own thoughts, repeating fears aloud. You will stay forever, ours. I followed the creek cautiously, ice cracking underfoot. Every bend revealed figures more numerous, more twisted, some partially hidden in snow. The ridge had created a sentient labyrinth, alive and aware, feeding on panic. My mind wavered. I realized that the forest's power was not physical, it was mental. It shaped perception, creating illusions to trap, break, and torment. At one bend, I glimpsed a faint light far in the distance, a logging road or ranger station perhaps. Hope surged. I sprinted, branches scratching, snow giving way beneath me. The figures followed, gliding with impossible speed, shadows twisting unnaturally across snow and fog. Every second felt like hours. I knew this was the ridge's final test. By dusk, I stumbled onto the logging road. Relief surged, but the ridge wasn't done. Shadows lingered at the edge of the trees, stretching unnaturally. The whispers softened, almost satisfied. You survived. For now. But we remember. I walked quickly, glancing behind, seeing twisted figures observing from the forest. I realized survival didn't mean escape. It meant enduring, resisting despair, and carrying the ridge's mark forever. Black Pine Ridge had released me, but only partially. Its whispers, shadows, and presence would haunt me indefinitely. I understood then that some mountains are alive, sentient, cruel. I kept moving, head down, until I finally reached civilization. Weeks later, I still hear whispers in my dreams. Shadows flicker at the corner of my eyes, and the chill never leaves my bones. Devil's Backbone did not merely haunt. It claimed a part of me forever. Months later, I returned to the trail, not by choice, but by memory. I needed closure. Yet the ridge had already marked me. Every photograph, every sound reminded me of its presence. The figures, the whispers, the unnatural trees, they exist, sentient, watching, patient. I know the ridge waits for others, testing, tormenting, shaping reality to trap those who wander. I survived, but my mind bears the scars. Devil's Backbone isn't a trail, it's a predator. And if you ever hike in the Appalachians, be warned. Some paths aren't meant to be walked. Some forests are alive, aware, and malevolent. Even now, I feel the whispers in the wind, the shadows in snow, the pressure of unseen eyes. Survival is temporary, and the forest remembers. My name is Ethan, and this happened during a solo trip deep into the Appalachian backwoods. I had rented an old cabin in Black Hollow, a place locals avoided after sunset. I thought it would be peaceful, just me, the forest, and the occasional deer. But I quickly realized the cabin had a presence of its own, one that watched and waited. The first night was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The air inside the cabin was cold despite the heater, and shadows clung to corners in ways that made no sense. I unpacked my gear, trying to dismiss the chill crawling up my spine. Then I heard it, a faint scratching on the exterior wall. At first, I thought it was branches or a raccoon, but the sound was deliberate, rhythmic, almost like someone or something was testing the structure, measuring me. I approached the window, flashlight in hand, and saw nothing but snow-draped pines swaying under a still wind. I laughed nervously at my imagination, but the scratching persisted, now accompanied by faint whispers. "Ethan, come out, join us." My heart raced. I checked the locks, tried to rationalize, but every instinct screamed danger. Black Hollow wasn't just a cabin, it was a trap, a lure for the unsuspecting. By midnight, the whispers became clearer, almost intelligible, echoing in my skull. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, and the cabin seemed to breathe around me. I realized then that I wasn't alone, and I might never truly leave. Unable to sleep, I explored the cabin, flashlight flickering with every step. Dust-covered furniture and faded wallpaper added to the sense of abandonment. But the scratches on the wooden floor suggested someone, or something, had been moving here recently. The whispers persisted, faint but mocking. "We see you. You cannot hide." I noticed a door at the back of the cabin leading to a cellar. Curiosity and fear warred inside me. My flashlight revealed stairs coated in frost and dirt, descending into complete darkness. The air was colder here, sharp, biting at my skin. Something moved at the edge of my vision, a shadow detaching from the wall, twisting unnaturally before disappearing. I swallowed hard, stepping cautiously down the stairs. The cellar smelled of decay. Old furniture leaned against the walls, but beneath the dust, I saw scratches etched into the stone floor, spirals, humanoid forms, and indecipherable symbols. The whispers grew louder, almost chanting now. "Ethan, join us, forever." My flashlight trembled in my hands as I realized the cabin was not just haunted, it was alive, aware, and malevolent. Suddenly, I heard footsteps above me, soft but deliberate. I froze, realizing I hadn't heard any sign of another human. Yet the cabin's upper floor seemed occupied. I had a choice, investigate or barricade myself. But either could be fatal. I climbed back up cautiously, every creak of the old wooden stairs echoing like gunshots. The cabin felt alive. Walls seemed to breathe, shadows stretched and twisted, and the whispers now spoke directly into my mind. "You belong to Black Hollow. You cannot leave." I gripped my flashlight like a weapon, my eyes scanning every corner. Suddenly, the room behind me shuddered. A gust of icy wind burst from nowhere, extinguishing the heater, plunging me into near total darkness. The whispers crescendoed, overlapping voices chanting my name. Panic surged, but I forced myself to stay calm, remembering the advice I had read about facing paranormal activity. Acknowledge, observe, survive. I noticed movement in the corner. A figure, pale and elongated, half hidden by shadows. It tilted its head unnaturally, observing me, its form bending like liquid. My chest tightened, adrenaline mixed with terror. I realized the cabin wasn't just haunted, it was sentient. Every floorboard, every shadow, every whisper was a trap, feeding on fear. I backed toward the front door, planning my escape, but it was as if the cabin had changed shape. Hallways stretched, corners bent impossibly, and the doors seemed further than before. Black Hollow had me where it wanted, an intruder to torment. Survival meant confronting it, but I had no idea how. I decided to search the upper floor. Each step was cautious, heart hammering. Dust swirled in the dim light, but the air was thick, heavy with an unseen presence. The whispers grew louder, now clearly mocking. "You think you can leave? Foolish. Ours." A bedroom door creaked open as I approached. Inside, the walls were covered in old photographs, families, hikers, people who had stayed here. But their eyes were scratched out, faces blurred. I shivered. One photo had a figure resembling me, drawn in black ink, elongated and faceless. My name was scrawled underneath in jagged letters. The whispers became screams. "Join us! Become part of Black Hollow!" My flashlight flickered, revealing a shadow on the floor, moving independently of the cabin. I stumbled backward, crashing into furniture. The shadow elongated, reaching for me, and I understood that this place did not just house spirits. It consumed souls, trapping them eternally. I ran down the hall, dodging furniture that seemed to shift with intent. Every turn led me deeper into the cabin's labyrinthine horror. The front door remained distant, as if the building itself were stretching, mocking my desperation. Survival now required cunning, courage, and a touch of luck I wasn't sure I had. By midnight, the cabin seemed to pulse around me, each creak of the floorboards echoing in my skull. Whispers grew into full sentences, voices overlapping. "Ethan, stay. You belong here. Ours." I clutched my flashlight, every instinct screaming to leave. But the door remained unreachable, stretched by some malevolent force. I stumbled into the living room. Furniture had shifted, forming barriers I didn't remember. Shadows pooled in corners, moving independently. One figure floated toward me, its limbs bending impossibly, head tilted unnaturally. Panic overtook reason. I ran, tripping over a rug that seemed to grow underfoot. In desperation, I grabbed a fireplace poker. The figure approached silently, shadows elongating as if to engulf me. My mind raced. This was no ordinary haunting. The cabin was alive, aware, and hungry. I swung the poker, and it passed through the figure like mist, momentarily dispersing it. The whispers quieted, but the oppressive sense of being watched remained. I realized then that survival required more than strength. It required understanding. Black Hollow did not just haunt. It tested, tormented, and fed on fear. My only hope was endurance and cunning, and hours dragged on. I moved through the cabin cautiously, flashlight beams slicing through darkness thick with shadow and whisper. Every wall seemed alive, breathing. The elongated figure from before had vanished, but its presence lingered, twisting reality. The whispers no longer just spoke my name. They mirrored my thoughts, exposing my fears aloud. "You cannot leave. You are ours." I tried barricading the door, but it stretched farther away with every step. Hallways elongated, corners bent impossibly, and the ceiling seemed to lower, pressing on me. My camera caught fleeting images, shadows moving independently, stretching unnaturally, forming grotesque humanoid shapes that seemed to leer from the walls. Panic surged, but I forced myself to breathe, knowing hysteria meant being trapped. Then I heard a sound. Footsteps above, soft and deliberate. My blood ran cold. No one else should be there. I crept up the stairs, flashlight quivering, heart hammering. In the bedroom, the photographs glared at me. Faces twisted, eyes staring from jagged darkness. One photograph moved on its own, sliding along the wall toward me. Black Hollow was testing me, observing my reactions. It was alive, aware, and cruel. Survival wasn't about strength. It was about outlasting the forest of shadows, enduring, and hoping the cabin grew bored before it claimed me entirely. I found myself back in the cellar, drawn inexplicably, though I had no memory of descending. The air was frigid, thick with decay. Shadows swirled along stone walls, and the whispers now became commands. Join us. Stay. Forever. My flashlight trembled in my hands, revealing scratches etched into the floor, spirals, humanoid forms, indecipherable symbols. A figure emerged from the shadows, elongated, faceless, limbs bending unnaturally. It floated toward me, gliding silently. I swung the hatchet in panic. It passed through the figure like mist. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my skull, blending with my heartbeat. The cabin seemed to fold around me, hallways stretching, ceilings lowering, reality bending. I realized then that Black Hollow wasn't just haunted. It was sentient. It consumed fear, shaping reality, trapping those who dared enter. My only chance of survival was cunning, endurance, and courage. Every instinct screamed to flee. Yet every path led deeper into the cabin's malevolent grip. I backed toward the cellar stairs, praying for dawn, praying the cabin would release me. Shadows lingered, watching, patient. The sentient horror of Black Hollow would not forget me. By early morning, the cabin seemed exhausted, or perhaps it allowed me temporary reprieve. I ventured outside cautiously. Snow crunched underfoot, cold wind biting my face. The forest around Black Hollow was silent, unnatural. Shadows moved just beyond perception, always at the edge of vision. I stumbled toward the logging road I had seen on the map. Each step felt measured, as if the forest resisted my progress. Whispers followed, softer now. We see you. You cannot hide. You belong. I glanced back. Nothing. Then I realized that shadows clung to the trees, waiting. The cabin itself seemed to breathe behind me, windows glowing faintly as if watching. I forced myself onward, slipping across icy terrain, every fiber of my being alert. I understood that Black Hollow was alive, aware, and patient. It didn't need to chase. It only needed to wait, and eventually, fear would make its prey stumble into its grasp. By afternoon, I reached the edge of the forest. Relief surged, but the shadows and whispers never truly left. Every frozen branch seemed to reach for me. Every whisper in the wind replayed my name. Black Hollow's presence clung to me like a second skin. Even in daylight, the forest felt alive, observing, remembering. I glanced at the cabin one last time. The roof sagged, the windows dark, but I knew it waited. It always waits. Every soul that dared enter became part of its living, breathing nightmare. My survival was temporary, its hunger eternal. Months later, I still feel it. The whispers in the wind, shadows at the edge of my vision, the weight of unseen eyes. Black Hollow Cabin claimed more than my fear. It marked me forever. I survived, but a part of me belongs to that sentient horror deep in the Appalachian forest. If you ever wander into Black Hollow, heed this warning. Some cabins are alive, some forests are sentient, and some horrors don't just haunt. They wait, patient, inevitable, and eternal. Even now, I can feel the cold grip of its presence whenever I close my eyes. I survived, but Black Hollow never forgets. My name is Sarah, and this happened during a hiking trip in the Appalachian Mountains. I had set out alone to explore Widow's Peak, a craggy ridge locals whispered about but never dared climb alone. The day had started serene, sunlight spilling across the pines, birds singing. But by late afternoon, an eerie fog crept over the ridge, suffocating the colors, muting the sounds. As I neared the summit, the temperature dropped abruptly. The wind carried whispers, faint and unintelligible at first. Then I realized the whispers weren't coming from the wind. They were inside my head. Stay. Forever. Join us. My flashlight, which I hadn't needed yet, flickered to life instinctively. I shivered, noticing shadows between the rocks, bending unnaturally like they were watching, waiting. I pressed onward, but every step seemed heavier, as if the ridge itself resisted me. Rocks shifted underfoot. Roots seemed to reach for my ankles, and the fog thickened, forming shapes that were almost human, yet grotesque in their elongation. I tried to rationalize, telling myself it was exhaustion or imagination, but the whispers grew louder, and I felt eyes boring into me. By nightfall, I had reached a small plateau near the summit. The shadows coalesced into figures, pale, elongated, faceless, tilting unnaturally. They did not move, but seemed to pulse with life, waiting. I realized then Widow's Peak was not just a place. It was alive, sentient, and hungry. I crouched behind a boulder, trying to control my shaking hands. The fog shifted, revealing glimpses of twisted humanoid shapes emerging silently from crevices, moving with impossible fluidity. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as the whispers became a chorus, echoing my thoughts. You cannot leave. You belong. I remembered the emergency beacon in my pack. Fumbling with frozen fingers, I tried to activate it, but the button refused to respond. It was as if the ridge had reached into my pack, sabotaging my escape. Panic surged, but I forced myself to focus. If I froze, Widow's Peak would claim me without resistance. I crept along the rocky ledge, flashlight illuminating twisted roots and jagged stones. Each step revealed footprints that I did not leave, leading deeper into the fog. Figures mirrored my movements, gliding effortlessly, stretching unnaturally, observing, calculating. My mind screamed to flee, but every path seemed to circle back, forcing me toward the summit, toward the unknown. Suddenly, one figure detached from the shadows, gliding toward me. I froze, its limbs bent impossibly, head tilting inhumanly. I swung my trekking pole, but it passed through the figure like mist. The whispers intensified. Join us. Forever. I realized then that Widow's Peak wasn't just haunted. It was alive, sentient, and malevolent. I scrambled toward a narrow crevice between jagged rocks, hoping to hide. But the fog seemed to thicken, curling around me like fingers. Every exhale turned into a visible puff of frost, and each heartbeat echoed like a drum in the unnatural silence. The whispers intensified, chanting my name over and over. Sarah, stay, belong. My legs trembled, yet some instinct pushed me forward. Then I saw them clearly. Figures emerging from the fog, pale and elongated, limbs bending at impossible angles. Their faces were featureless, yet somehow I felt them staring, piercing into my very soul. I turned a corner and stumbled upon a frozen waterfall cascading in eerie silence. Its icy surface reflected the figures behind me, multiplied into dozens, their movements synchronized, unnerving in their precision. I understood then that Widow's Peak wasn't just alive, it was a predator. Every shadow, every whisper, every icy gust of wind was a part of its sentience. It fed on fear, luring travelers to the summit to trap them. My hand shook as I gripped my trekking pole, scanning for a path that wasn't an illusion. The fog shifted again, and a path opened to what looked like the true summit. I had no choice. Moving forward meant confronting the unknown and perhaps surviving. Moving backward meant being lost forever in the whispers and shadows. I stepped forward, heart hammering. I reached the summit plateau, barely able to stand. The fog swirled around me like a living thing, carrying whispers that now merged into a single, ominous voice. You cannot leave. You belong to Widow's Peak. The silhouettes of the figures grew taller, twisting impossibly, each movement deliberate and predatory. The plateau was littered with bones, animal at first glance, but some were human, gnawed and broken, frozen in horrifying poses. The sight made bile rise in my throat, but there was no time to dwell. The figures slowly advanced, floating rather than walking, limbs bending unnaturally, heads tilted in unnatural synchrony. I noticed an old stone altar in the center of the plateau, etched with strange runes and symbols. The fog coalesced above it, forming shapes of past travelers, their faces contorted in eternal horror. The whispers revealed fragments of memories, fear, despair, and the cold acceptance of being trapped. I realized the altar was the heart of Widow's Peak's power, a conduit for its sentience. I had to survive, but approaching or avoiding the altar seemed equally dangerous. Each step I took was mirrored by the figures, their shadows stretching impossibly. I gritted my teeth, preparing for confrontation, knowing that any hesitation could be my last. I circled the altar cautiously, flashlight illuminating the runes etched in ice and stone. The whispers merged into chants, almost hypnotic, pulling at the edges of my consciousness. Stay. Belong forever. Every breath felt heavier, my muscles trembling from fear and exhaustion. A shadow detached itself from the fog, floating toward me. Its limbs bent in ways no human body could, and its faceless head tilted, studying me. I swung my trekking pole, but it passed through harmlessly. Panic surged, but I forced myself to focus, remembering that fear was the source of their power. I had to act without hesitation, without letting terror consume me. I noticed a crack in the plateau rocks, a narrow path leading downward. The figures seemed hesitant to follow, their elongated forms stretching toward the edge, but unable to cross. The whispers shrieked in protest, echoing across the ridge. Do not leave. Stay. Ours. I ran toward the crack, slipping on ice, barely avoiding the grasp of a shadow that reached impossibly far. The path narrowed, winding down the cliffside. My heart raced as I descended into the fog, every instinct screaming to flee, every shadow whispering death. Widow's Peak was alive, and it hated me for daring to escape. The narrow path twisted sharply, clinging to the cliffside. Each foothold was treacherous, icy, and slick. The shadows of the figures stretched along the fog, reaching impossibly toward me, their whispers now screaming. Return. You belong here. My pulse thundered in my ears, adrenaline driving my movements, every step a battle against fear and the mountain itself. I glanced behind me. Nothing but fog. Yet I felt them. Felt their elongated forms sliding along the rocks, twisting around trees, bending reality to trap me. The wind carried their whispers, now urgent and angry, echoing through the ravine. You cannot escape. You are ours. Every instinct screamed that Widow's Peak had claimed countless others, each one part of the living fog, a shadow in its sentience. At a sudden bend, I stumbled upon a small ledge, partially hidden by twisted roots. I collapsed there, gasping for breath, listening to the distorted whispers vibrating in my skull. The fog seemed to pulse, alive, surrounding me, pressing closer. I realized survival required endurance, cunning, and absolute focus. Panic would only make me another echo in Widow's Peak. I waited, every muscle tense, eyes scanning the shifting shadows. Minutes passed, or hours. Time felt distorted. Then I saw it, a faint light at the base of the mountain. My heart surged with hope, though the shadows reached toward it, as if trying to pull me back. I resumed my descent, cautiously navigating the treacherous terrain. The shadows followed, stretching impossibly, merging with the fog, whispering incessantly. Return. Stay. Belong. I shook my head, trying to block out the voices, but they were inside me now, gnawing at my sanity. A fallen tree blocked my path, its roots twisted like grasping hands. I clambered over it, narrowly avoiding an outstretched shadow that reached impossibly far, grazing my arm. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The touch was brief, but its presence lingered, embedding itself into my mind. Widow's Peak was aware. It knew I was alive. The faint light below grew brighter, revealing a ridge path leading down. The shadows hesitated, as if unable to cross some invisible boundary. I ran, slipping on ice, crawling past gnarled roots, barely daring to breathe. The whispers faded slowly, replaced by the howl of the wind and the distant call of a lone owl. By the time I reached the base of the mountain, dawn broke, scattering the fog. The shadows vanished, but I could still feel them watching. Widow's Peak hadn't let me go. It merely released me for now. I knew the ridge waited, patient, sentient, ready to claim the next traveler. I stumbled into the forest, the warmth of sunlight slowly replacing the suffocating chill. Yet the whispers never truly left. They echoed faintly in my mind. Every tree seemed alive, every shadow a potential observer. The ridge of Widow's Peak loomed behind me, silent but pulsing with intent. I stopped near a small stream, desperate to collect my thoughts. The water reflected my face, pale, drawn, haunted. In the reflection, I thought I saw a shadow linger behind me. A figure, faceless, elongated, watching. I spun around, but nothing was there. Widow's Peak had marked me, its presence lingering like a phantom. Even as I made my way down the forest trail, I sensed the ridge following me. Every crunch of leaves, every rustle of branches seemed amplified, deliberate. The sentience of Widow's Peak was not bound to the summit. It reached outward, a predator stalking the edges of perception. I vowed never to return. Yet I knew the memory of those whispers. The elongated figures and the frozen altar would never leave me. The ridge had embedded itself into my consciousness, a permanent echo of terror. By afternoon, I reached a small cabin near the base of the trail, where a ranger helped me recover. My story sounded insane to him, but the look in his eyes suggested he knew more than he said. He warned me of Widow's Peak, telling tales of hikers vanishing without a trace. I realized then that what I experienced was not folklore. It was real, tangible, and alive. Even weeks later, I still hear faint whispers in the wind, shadows that move at the edge of my vision. I've tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was exhaustion, hallucination, or fear. But the memory of those faceless figures, stretching unnaturally, will not fade. Widow's Peak is patient, sentient, and eternal. I warned friends, but most dismissed it as paranoia. I now know that the mountain doesn't just haunt, it waits. And it remembers every trespasser. I returned home, but I am never truly alone. The whispers follow me, faint at first, growing louder when I'm tired or alone. Shadows stretch unnaturally in my apartment, corners bending as if the mountain itself exists there. Widow's Peak claimed more than my fear. It marked my soul. If anyone dares to climb it, heed my warning. Some mountains are sentient, some peaks hunger, and some horrors do not sleep. They wait, patient and inevitable. I survived. But Widow's Peak waits for the next traveler, and someday it will not let go. My name is Marcus, and this happened during a solo hiking trip in the Appalachian Mountains. I had heard rumors of Raven's Hollow, a deep, shadowed ravine known for strange disappearances. Curiosity and my need for adventure drew me there despite the warnings. The forest was dense, sunlight barely breaking through twisted branches. Every step into the hollow felt like stepping into another world, one alive with whispers and unseen eyes. At first, the hollow seemed peaceful. Birds chirped faintly, leaves rustled in the wind, and the trail was clear. But soon, a strange chill settled over the forest. The trees seemed to bend toward me, shadows twisting unnaturally. I felt as if I were being watched by something alive, something patient. The further I walked, the more the whispers grew. Soft at first, almost melodic, calling my name. Marcus, come closer, stay. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nerves, imagination, or the wind. But then I noticed footprints alongside mine, larger, distorted, not matching any human shape. Panic nudged at the edges of my mind, but I pressed onward. Something deep in the hollow wanted me. By nightfall, I had reached a clearing where the moonlight revealed the silhouettes of figures standing still among the trees. Tall, thin, faceless, their limbs bending impossibly. My heart thundered, and I realized Raven's Hollow was more than folklore. It was alive, sentient, and hungry. I tried to backtrack, but the hollow seemed to shift. Every tree I passed appeared subtly moved, branches curling toward me, roots twisting underfoot like grasping hands. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chorus of distorted voices. "You cannot leave. You belong to us." I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin, half collapsed and covered in moss. Its windows were dark, yet I felt something watching from inside. The footprints led straight to the cabin, then vanished. My instincts screamed to flee, but I was drawn forward, unable to resist some magnetic pull that emanated from the structure. Inside, the air was thick and cold. Dust swirled in the beam of my flashlight, revealing scratches on the wooden walls. Symbols I couldn't understand, some resembling elongated humanoid forms. Whispers echoed inside, circling me, teasing my fear and testing my resolve. I realized that Raven's Hollow didn't just exist. It had a will, aware of intruders, feeding on their terror. As I explored cautiously, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, flashlight shaking, and glimpsed a figure, pale, faceless, limbs bending impossibly, hovering silently, waiting. Every instinct told me to run, yet the hollow had already ensnared my mind, twisting reality around me. I backed toward the cabin door, every movement watched by those faceless figures. My flashlight flickered, revealing more silhouettes pressed against the walls, their elongated limbs bending impossibly, heads tilting unnaturally. Whispers became a chorus of commands. "Stay. Join us. You belong here." My chest tightened as I realized the hollow wasn't just haunted, it was alive. In a panic, I noticed a trap door leading to a basement. Desperation drove me downward. The stairs groaned under my weight, echoing through the small space. The basement was darker than the night itself. Walls lined with shelves holding strange jars, each containing bones and frozen remains. Some were animals, others unmistakably human. The air smelled of decay and frost, chilling my lungs. I tried to make sense of it all, but the whispers grew louder, now inside my skull, repeating my name. Marcus. Stay. Forever. Shadows moved along the walls independently, stretching toward me, forming grotesque shapes, reflecting my deepest fears. I realized survival depended on staying calm, yet every instinct screamed in terror. Then I heard a scraping sound, metal against wood. A figure detached itself from the shadows, floating silently toward me. Its limbs bent in unnatural angles, and though faceless, I felt its gaze pierce through me. Every ounce of fear surged, yet I forced my legs to move, narrowly avoiding its grasp and rushing into the deeper darkness. I stumbled through the basement, flashlight trembling, shadows twisting violently around me. Every corner revealed another figure, tall, pale, faceless, limbs bending impossibly. Whispers clawed at my mind, repeating fears I hadn't voiced aloud. The hollow was feeding on my terror, shaping reality around me, bending space so that the exit seemed further away with every step. I discovered a trapdoor hidden under an old rug. Pulling it open revealed a narrow tunnel leading outside, faint moonlight glimmering at the end. The whispers roared in defiance. You cannot leave. You belong. I crawled through the tunnel, heart hammering, limbs stiff with cold and panic. The walls seemed to pulse, alive, pressing in as though the hollow itself was squeezing me. Finally, I emerged into the forest. The moonlight illuminated a narrow path, snow crunching underfoot. But the shadows of the figures lingered, clinging to trees, stretching unnaturally. Every instinct screamed to flee. Yet I sensed the hollow's awareness, watching my every move. It wasn't finished with me. I ran blindly, the forest a blur of twisted trunks and shadows. Whispers followed, faint at first, then louder, as if the trees themselves were speaking. We see you. You cannot escape. I realized then that Raven's Hollow didn't need to chase. It only needed to wait. Patient, sentient, inevitable. I navigated the forest cautiously, snow and ice crunching underfoot. The hollow seemed to stretch infinitely, paths looping back toward the cabin. Every shadow and branch twisted unnaturally, stretching toward me. Whispers now carried fragments of voices from past victims, screams, pleas, and distorted chants of fear. I stumbled upon an old log cabin abandoned decades ago. Its roof caved in, windows shattered. But I sensed life within, an unnatural presence. Shadows moved behind broken panes, limbs bending in ways that defied nature. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet I was drawn toward the cabin. Some force inside the hollow demanded observation, testing my courage, my will to survive. Inside, remnants of past trespassers littered the floor. Torn backpacks, frostbitten clothing, journals filled with frantic writing. The air reeked of decay. Whispers surrounded me, repeating my fears aloud. You are ours. You cannot leave. Forever. A figure detached itself from the fog of shadows, gliding toward me silently. I barely managed to avoid its grasp, slipping out a broken window into the night. The forest swallowed me, and the hollow's awareness seemed to pulse behind me like a heartbeat, relentless, patient, eternal. Survival depended on distance, but I sensed the hollow's consciousness stretching, waiting for the next misstep. I ran through the forest, each step uncertain on the uneven ground. Snow crunched beneath my boots, echoing loudly in the unnatural silence. The shadows followed, stretching across the trees, bending in impossible angles. Every exhale seemed amplified, as if the hollow itself fed on the sound of my fear. You cannot leave. You belong, the whispers hissed, reverberating in my skull. A narrow ravine appeared ahead, its walls slick with ice and dripping water. I had no choice but to descend. The shadows hovered along the edges, reaching impossibly far, yet unable to cross the natural divide. I slid down the frozen rocks, heart pounding, clutching at roots and jagged stones. The hollow pulsed behind me, its presence heavy, aware, predatory. At the bottom, I found an overgrown path, barely visible beneath the snow. The whispers seemed to linger in the air, echoing faintly but persistently. Every instinct screamed that I was still within the hollow's grasp. Even as the first hints of dawn touched the treetops, the shadows remained, stretching and twisting, silent but ever present, observing, waiting. I forced myself to keep moving, understanding that any hesitation would cost me everything. The hollow was patient, and it had already begun to map my fear, every pulse and heartbeat imprinted into its consciousness. I had survived the night, but only barely. The overgrown path led me deeper into the forest. Fog lingered in pockets, curling around the twisted roots and skeletal branches like living tendrils. My legs burned from exhaustion, my lungs gasped with each breath. Yet I forced myself forward. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle amplified. I noticed small offerings along the trail. Stones stacked unnaturally, animal bones impaled on roots. The hollow marked its territory, reminding trespassers that it had been waiting for centuries, patient, sentient, unyielding. The whispers grew fainter but more focused, as if calculating my fear, learning my weaknesses. You cannot escape. You are ours. Ahead, a small creek glimmered in the early light, a possible source of safety. Yet, as I approached, I saw figures lurking beneath the trees, elongated and faceless, bending in impossible angles, their presence oppressive. The hollow was testing me, gauging my resolve. Panic clawed at me, but I forced calm, knowing that terror would only strengthen it. I carefully crossed the creek, ice cracking beneath my weight, shadows gliding along the edges. My mind screamed that survival required endurance and caution. Every step was a gamble. Yet I moved, driven by instinct and desperation. Raven's Hollow had not released me. It merely allowed another chance. The forest gradually thinned, revealing a clearing bathed in weak morning sunlight. Relief surged through me. Yet the shadows persisted, clinging to the edges, twisting unnaturally. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I could sense the hollow's consciousness stretching toward me, patient, relentless. I stumbled upon an old ranger station, abandoned decades ago. Its windows shattered, walls warped and weathered. The shadows lingered, hesitant to enter the structure, but their presence was undeniable. I stepped inside, finding remnants of past trespassers. Journals filled with frantic scribbles, frostbitten clothing, and rusted tools abandoned in terror. The whispers became echoes of past victims' memories, overlapping screams and pleas merging with distorted chants. I realized that Raven's Hollow was more than a location. It was a sentient predator, feeding on fear and imprinting the minds of those who entered. My pulse throbbed as I absorbed the chilling realization. Escape did not mean freedom. The Hollow never forgot. I rested briefly, scanning the forest through the broken windows. Pale figures lingered at the edges of perception, limbs bending unnaturally, tilting their faceless heads. Every step I had taken had been observed, catalogued. The Hollow was patient. It would wait for another moment of weakness, another unwary traveler to claim. I finally emerged from the forest onto a dirt road. snow melting beneath my boots. Relief washed over me, though the memory of the hollow's whispers and shadows lingered like ice in my veins. Even in daylight, every tree, every shadow seemed alive, bending unnaturally at the edges of my vision. I encountered a lone hiker down the road and warned him about Raven's Hollow. His skeptical eyes mirrored countless others I had tried to warn. I realized the Hollow's power wasn't just physical. It thrived in disbelief, in fear dismissed. Those who ignored it often became its next victims. Driving away from the Hollow, I glanced at the ridge, still shrouded in lingering fog, pale shadows twisting along its crests. I had survived, barely. Yet I knew part of me had been claimed. The Hollow's presence would haunt my dreams, whispering in moments of solitude, a permanent scar on my psyche. Every sound, every shadow reminded me. Raven's Hollow waits. It watches, it remembers, and eventually, it takes. Weeks later, even at home, I hear whispers when the wind rustles outside. Shadows stretch oddly across my walls at night, corners bending as if alive. The Hollow's presence lingers in my mind, a constant reminder that some places are sentient. Some mountains and ravines hunger, and some horrors never truly let go. I warn others now, but few believe. They see only a forest, a hollow, a trail. They do not hear the whispers, do not feel the pulse of sentient malice. I survived, but Raven's Hollow has marked me. I know it will wait, patient, calculating, for the next unwary soul. And when it strikes, it will be merciless, eternal and unrelenting. Some horrors never leave, some forests never forgive, and some ravines, like Raven's Hollow, never sleep. My name is Evelyn, and this happened during a hiking expedition with friends in the Appalachian Mountains. We had heard of Black Hollow Ridge, a steep, jagged summit notorious for disappearances and strange occurrences. Skeptical yet intrigued, we decided to explore it despite the ominous stories. The sun was beginning to set, casting elongated shadows across the thick forest floor as we climbed. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Crunching leaves underfoot, the distant call of birds, the cool mountain air. But soon, a deep unease settled over me. The ridge ahead was cloaked in an unnatural fog, thick and suffocating. I felt watched, my heartbeat accelerating, each step heavier than the last. Whispers danced through the trees, barely audible at first, then louder, almost intelligible. Turn back. Do not climb. Stay with us. I dismissed it as nerves. But then I noticed footprints that weren't ours, deeply pressed into the soft earth, some human-sized, others grotesquely long, as if made by something inhuman. Shadows flickered unnaturally in the fog, stretching beyond logic. My friends laughed nervously, unaware of the movement just beyond the fog, just beyond the trees. A sudden chill ran through me. Black Hollow Ridge was alive, aware, and patient. It waited. The stories weren't legends, they were warnings, and I had stepped right into its hunger. As we climbed, the fog thickened, swallowing the path ahead. Each step felt heavier, as though the mountain itself resisted our presence. Whispers escalated, overlapping voices repeating our names, echoing our fears. Evelyn, you cannot leave. Belong to us. My friends noticed the change, tension rising, yet the fog seemed to respond to our fear. Shapes began to emerge, tall, faceless figures bending impossibly, limbs twisting against logic. They moved in silence, gliding over rocks and roots, always just at the edge of vision. I tried to speak, to warn my friends, but the air seemed heavy, constricting, muting our voices. I tripped over a root and fell against a tree. Its bark seemed to pulse under my hands, warm, almost breathing. The ridge was alive. I realized it didn't need to chase us. It merely observed, calculated, and waited for fear to consume us. Every instinct screamed to descend, yet the trail seemed to stretch endlessly upward, a labyrinth designed to disorient and trap. A sudden movement in the fog made me spin. One figure, faceless and impossibly elongated, stood closer than I thought possible. It tilted its head unnaturally, observing. I could feel its awareness probing my mind, feeding on my panic. Black Hollow Ridge had claimed our attention, and it would not release it easily. We pressed on, hearts pounding, fog thickening until the world around us felt unreal. Every rock, every root seemed to shift subtly, guiding us deeper into the ridge's grasp. The whispers intensified, now layered with past screams, as if the ridge collected the fear of those it had claimed. At one point, I glanced behind and saw a figure, a pale, faceless humanoid, limbs bent unnaturally, hovering without touching the ground. Its presence radiated malice and intelligence, as if the ridge had sent it to study us. I shivered violently, gripping my walking stick like a lifeline. My friends began to panic, arguing over which path to take. But the ridge had twisted reality. The paths all seemed to lead upward, toward the mist, toward the shadows. Time lost meaning. The sun's light fading unnaturally fast, replaced by an eerie twilight despite the hour. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed, a tree falling, though no wind stirred. The shadows reacted, converging subtly toward us, observing, bending the fog. One figure moved closer, and though it had no face, I felt its gaze pierce me, reading my deepest fears. I realized that escape depended not on running, but on cunning. Panic would ensure we joined the ridge's collection of lost souls. My breath came in shallow gasps as I tried to map a way down, careful not to provoke the ridge further. We stumbled across an ancient stone marker, partially covered in moss. Strange symbols carved into it twisted unnaturally, seeming to shift when we weren't looking directly. My stomach turned. This was no ordinary ridge. It was a place older than memory, sentient, watching, feeding on those who dared enter. A low whisper echoed through the mist. "You belong." The sound seemed to emanate from every direction at once. One of my friends screamed suddenly, pointing at the fog. A figure had materialized inches from her, faceless, bending impossibly, reaching toward her. The air grew icy, every breath burned. I grabbed her arm, pulling her back, but the figure remained. It seemed to mock us, testing our resolve. Shadows moved independently, forming grotesque shapes along the rocks and trees. I realized then that the ridge could manipulate space, creating illusions, feeding fear, and calculating our every decision. We pressed on, trying to stay together, but the ridge seemed determined to separate us. Every step into the fog felt like being swallowed alive, our screams drowned beneath the collective whispers of past victims. I understood finally. The ridge didn't merely claim lives, it claimed minds. Hours, or perhaps minutes, passed in disorienting silence, punctuated only by the whispers. The fog thickened further, obscuring the path entirely. Every sense screamed danger, every shadow felt alive. I led my friends cautiously, trying to recall landmarks, but the ridge seemed to distort reality, each tree, rock, and root shifting subtly. Then I saw it, a narrow passage between two cliffs, barely visible through the mist. Hope surged. As we moved toward it, The shadows stretched impossibly along the rocks, reaching out with thin, unnatural limbs. One figure moved faster than possible, intercepting our path, blocking the exit. My heart raced, knowing that hesitation could be fatal. I shouted, trying to distract it, and we dove past it in a blur, adrenaline propelling us. The fog seemed to pulse as we ran, as though the ridge itself was breathing, aware and angry. I realized that the ridge had no need to chase. It only needed to manipulate perception, feeding fear, bending reality until we stumbled. By some miracle, we reached a faint glimmer of light ahead, signaling the forest's edge. But even as we crossed into clarity, the whispers lingered, faint yet persistent, a reminder that the ridge would never forget our presence. We emerged from the dense fog into a thinning forest, snow and frost covering the ground. Relief surged through us, but the shadows lingered, twisting along the trees, elongating unnaturally, just at the edge of our vision. The ridge's whispers were faint but persistent, a low hum vibrating through my bones. You cannot leave. Not yet. Our pace quickened. Each step forward seemed to trigger subtle changes. The trail stretched further, rocks shifted slightly, and branches twisted toward us as if alive. I realized the ridge was still aware of our presence, testing us, feeding on our adrenaline and fear. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced calm, keeping my friends together. A broken wooden sign marked the path to the old ranger station nearby. Its roof was partially collapsed, windows shattered. Yet, it appeared like a sanctuary in the unnatural landscape. But the air inside was thick with cold and decay. I could feel the ridge's presence pressing in from every angle, almost tactile, watching, waiting. Inside, remnants of previous hikers were scattered. Boots, torn clothing, journals filled with frantic writing. The ridge had collected them, preserved the evidence of terror. I shuddered, realizing we were now part of its story, observed, recorded, and tested. Even in daylight, Black Hollow Ridge was alive. We rested briefly, trying to gather strength. Every sound outside, the rustle of leaves, a snapping branch, made us jump. Shadows moved independently, gliding along the trees, stretching limbs in unnatural angles. The ridge was patient, waiting for our weakest moment. I explored the ranger station cautiously, finding journals filled with terrified scribbles, sketches of faceless figures, and notes on the ridge's strange behavior. Whispers filled my head as I read. Past victims detailing the same experiences, the same unrelenting fear. It was a record, a living memory of all who had entered Black Hollow Ridge. Suddenly, a low, rumbling whisper filled the air, speaking directly into my mind. You will stay. Forever. One of the shadows detached from the forest outside and glided silently toward the doorway, limbs bending impossibly. My friend screamed as it pressed closer, observing, testing. I realized that fear itself empowered the ridge. Panic would seal our fate. We forced ourselves outside, the cold air biting at our skin, adrenaline fueling each step. The fog seemed to pulse behind us, alive, aware. Every instinct screamed to descend, to flee. But the ridge's consciousness followed us relentlessly. The path downward was treacherous. Snow-covered rocks, slippery roots, and unnatural twists of the trail slowed us. Shadows lingered along edges, moving independently, observing, testing. I realized the ridge manipulated reality. It wasn't just a location. It was sentient, aware, patient. A sudden shriek echoed from the fog. One of my friends froze, staring at a shadow that had detached itself from the trees. Its limbs bent impossibly as it floated closer, faceless gaze locked on her. Panic surged. I grabbed her, pulling her forward, heart pounding. The ridge fed on fear, calculated our every move. Even as daylight increased, the fog persisted in patches, lingering like a living entity. The ridge's whispers had faded, but their intent remained, patient, calculating. It allowed us small victories to test our resolve, to learn our limits. I realized that survival depended on courage, control, and constant movement. By nightfall, we finally glimpsed the main trail leading out of the ridge. Snow and fog cleared slightly, but shadows remained at the edges, bending unnaturally, lingering like memories of horror. Black Hollow Ridge had observed us, recorded us, and we were now part of its history. We reached the valley below, but the ridge's presence remained. Every tree seemed alive, twisting unnaturally, shadows elongating. I could still hear faint whispers in the wind, memories of those who had vanished echoing in my mind. We paused, exhausted, reflecting on our survival. The ridge had allowed us to escape, but it had claimed a part of us. Fear lingered, a permanent mark. Even at a distance, Black Hollow Ridge had a presence, sentient, patient, relentless. As we moved toward civilization, I noticed subtle signs. The shadows of faceless figures reflected in snow patches, fleeting glimpses in tree trunks. The ridge's hunger had not ended. It waited for the next intruder. We finally reached a road, our feet aching, bodies numb, minds exhausted. Relief mingled with terror as I realized that some horrors never truly release their victims. Black Hollow Ridge had observed, and its memory would endure in our minds forever. Weeks later, even in safety, I felt its presence. Shadows stretched oddly across walls at night. Whispers echoed in my mind during storms, and dreams replayed the ridge's twisted horrors. Black Hollow Ridge had claimed part of me. It lingered in thought, in perception, a permanent mark. I warn others now, but few believe. They see only a ridge, a forest, a trail. They do not hear the whispers, do not feel the pulse of sentience within the fog and rocks. I survived, but Black Hollow Ridge's curse will wait for the next unwary soul. Some places are sentient, some mountains hunger, and some horrors, like Black Hollow Ridge, never truly let go.